The meteorite streaked through Earth's atmosphere with unexpected grace, its trajectory carrying it toward the remote mountains of northern Montana. To most observers from the nearby town of Pinewood, it was just another cosmic rock meeting its end in a brilliant flash. Only Michael Shaw, watching through his observatory telescope, noticed the object's deceleration, a physical impossibility for an ordinary meteorite. Michael's heart pounded as he tracked the object's controlled descent. At 32, with a doctorate in astrophysics and a position at Pinewood's modest research station that most would consider career stagnation, he had spent years searching the skies for exactly this moment. His colleagues had long dismissed his theories about intelligent life, relegating him to overnight observation shifts and limited funding. Controlled entry vector, he muttered to himself, making notes with trembling hands. Approximately 2 kilometers from Mount Holloway. He grabbed his emergency pack, always prepared for this impossible moment, and rushed to his weathered Jeep. The mountain roads were treacherous in the darkness, but Michael navigated them with practiced ease. His headlights cut through the dense forest as he approached the impact zone. The air smelled of ozone and something unfamiliar, metallic yet organic. The object had carved a narrow trench through the pine forest before coming to rest in a small clearing. Michael approached cautiously, flashlight beam dancing across the wreckage. It wasn't a meteorite at all, but a craft of some kind, roughly oval-shaped and barely large enough for a single occupant. The material gleamed with an iridescent quality unlike any alloy he recognized. "Hello?" he called out, feeling foolish but unsure what protocol existed for first contact. "Is anyone there?" A section of the craft shifted, sliding open with a pneumatic hiss. Michael froze, flashlight trained on the opening as a figure emerged. His breath caught in his throat. She, and Michael's mind instantly registered the form as female despite clear anatomical differences, stood slightly taller than him. Her skin shimmered with a faint bluish luminescence, marked with intricate patterns that seemed to pulse with her breathing. Where human hair would be, delicate tendrils moved with apparent consciousness. Her eyes, large and vividly purple, fixed on him with unmistakable intelligence. The alien took a step forward and collapsed. Michael rushed forward without thinking, catching her before she hit the ground. She was surprisingly light in his arms, her skin warm but with an unusual texture like smooth suede. A dark fluid seeped from a wound on her side, blood, he realized with a shock. Despite her alien appearance, she bled like any Earth creature. "It's okay," he said softly, knowing she couldn't understand but hoping his tone conveyed his intent. "I'll help you." The alien's eyes fluttered, and she spoke, a melodic series of sounds unlike any human language. Her hand reached up, touching his face with surprising gentleness. Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition, an understanding beyond words. Michael made a decision. The scientific protocols demanded he report this discovery immediately, but instinct told him that would mean this being's imprisonment and probable death. The government would take her, study her, fear her. He couldn't let that happen. "I'm taking you somewhere safe," he said, carefully lifting her. His cabin was isolated, well stocked with medical supplies, and off the grid, perfect for hiding an extraterrestrial visitor. As he carried her to his vehicle, the alien drifted in and out of consciousness. Each time her eyes opened, they found his face, studying him with an intensity that seemed to pierce through his very being. Back at his cabin, Michael cleaned and bandaged her wound as best he could, relieved to find her anatomy similar enough to humans that basic first aid seemed appropriate. He set up a makeshift bed, keeping her warm and comfortable. Throughout the night, he watched over her, documenting her recovery while searching for ways to communicate. By morning, her condition had stabilized, and when she finally woke fully, she sat up with surprising strength. "Hello," Michael said simply. "I'm Michael." The alien watched him for a long moment, then touched her chest. "Talia," she said, the sound clear and deliberate. Michael's eyes widened. "Talia," he repeated, pointing to her. She nodded, then pointed to him. Michael. It was the beginning of understanding, a bridge across the cosmic divide. As the mountain sun rose outside, casting golden light through the cabin windows, Michael Shaw realized his life would never be the same. Here, in this remote corner of Earth, two species had met not in fear or violence, but in compassion and curiosity. And something else stirred beneath that initial connection, something neither of them yet had words to express. 3 weeks had passed since Michael brought Talia to his cabin. The autumn chill descended upon the mountains, painting the forests in brilliant hues of amber and crimson. Inside, the pair had established a routine that felt surprisingly domestic despite its extraordinary nature. Talia stood by the window, her luminescent skin casting soft blue reflections against the glass as she watched a deer and her fawn grazing at the forest's edge. Her recovery had been remarkable, the wound on her side now just a faint mark. She wore Michael's flannel shirt and sweatpants, comically oversized on her slender frame. Animals, she said, the English word shaped carefully by her unusual vocal structures. Like Calara on my world. Michael looked up from his computer where he'd been cataloging their language exchanges. Calara? Are they similar to deer? Talia turned to him, her expressive eyes brightening. Her ability to learn English had proven astonishing, her mind grasping patterns and structures faster than any human could. Yes. 4 legs. Gentle. But Calara have. She made a spiraling motion above her head. Horns? Like antlers but spiral-shaped? She nodded, pleased. Spiral horns. Beautiful. She moved to sit across from him at the kitchen table, her movements fluid and graceful. Michael, I must tell you truth now. My language good enough? He closed his laptop, giving her his full attention. Something in her tone suggested importance. I'm listening. I am not explorer. I am running away. Her tendrils, which he'd learned expressed emotions her face couldn't, curled inward slightly. My people, the Liriani, we are divided. Leaders believe humans are dangerous, want to avoid contact. I was diplomat to Council of Worlds. I learned different truths about Earth. When I spoke against isolation policy, they. She searched for the word. Silenced me. Michael frowned. They hurt you for disagreeing? Not physically. Politically. I was to be mind-altered, memories changed. Her hand unconsciously touched the back of her neck. I escaped an emergency vessel. Programmed for Earth. Wanted to see for myself. The implication staggered Michael. Not only was she a refugee, but her arrival meant her civilization knew of Earth's existence and had been watching. How long have your people known about us? Centuries. We monitor many developing worlds. Her expression softened. My people fear what they do not understand. They see human violence, wars, environmental damage. They do not see human kindness. Her fingers reached across the table, hesitantly touching his hand. They did not see you. The contact sent a strange warmth through Michael's arm. Her touch was cooler than human skin, but not unpleasant, like silk slightly chilled. Will they come looking for you? He asked, suddenly protective. Eventually. My vessel sent automatic distress signal before crash. But space is vast. Could be months, even years. That evening, they sat before the fireplace as wind whistled outside. Michael had introduced Talia to hot chocolate, which she sipped with delighted curiosity. The firelight played across her features, accentuating the luminous patterns that shifted subtly with her emotions. Your music is my favorite human creation, Talia said as soft jazz played from Michael's old record player. We have mathematics in sound, but not this feeling. Would you show me something from your world? Michael asked. Talia set down her mug and closed her eyes. Her tendrils began to move in unison, and from her throat came a sound unlike anything Michael had heard, multiple tones simultaneously, creating harmonies that seemed to bend the air itself. The cabin filled with a melody both alien and strangely moving, evoking emotions that felt ancient and universal. When she finished, Michael realized his eyes were wet. "That was beautiful," he whispered. "It is our story song. Of stars and beginnings." She moved closer to him on the couch. "Your eyes produce water when moved. Fascinating." "They're called tears," he explained, slightly embarrassed. Her hand reached up, gently touching the moisture on his cheek. "Tears," she repeated, studying the drop on her fingertip. "Your body speaks your emotions. Doesn't yours?" "Differently." She guided his hand to her chest, where he felt a subtle vibration beneath his palm. "We resonate." The intimacy of the moment caught them both by surprise. Michael became acutely aware of her closeness, of the strange and wonderful alienness of her, yet also of the undeniable connection growing between them. Talia's eyes, with pupils that expanded vertically rather than circularly, dilated as she studied his face. "Humans bond through physical contact," she stated, part question and part observation. "Yes," Michael managed, his voice unexpectedly hoarse. "Touch is important to us." "Show me," she whispered. With gentle hesitation, Michael lifted his hand to her face, tracing the luminescent patterns that curved along her cheekbone. They brightened at his touch, following his fingers like phosphorescent waves. Talia's eyes drifted closed, her tendrils relaxing into flowing waves that Michael now recognized as contentment. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to understand his intention, to pull away if she wished. Instead, she moved toward him, and their lips met in a kiss that transcended species and worlds. Her lips were softer than he'd expected, with a faint taste like honey and starlight. The luminescent patterns across her skin pulsed brighter, casting the room in a gentle blue glow. When they finally separated, both were breathing differently. "This is why they fear us," Talia whispered. "Not your weapons or your conflicts. They fear we would find each other too compatible, too drawn to one another. History repeating itself." "What history?" Michael asked, still holding her close. But Talia only shook her head, her expression suddenly distant. "Another time. Tonight, just this." Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, coating the world in pristine white, while inside, two beings from different stars discovered that some connections transcend the vast emptiness of space. The mountain winter had settled in fully, transforming Michael's remote property into a snow-covered sanctuary. For 2 months, Talia and Michael had existed in a bubble of their own making, studying each other's cultures, languages, and bodies. Their relationship had deepened with each passing day, evolving into something neither had words to properly define. In the basement of the cabin, Michael had helped Talia salvage components from her crashed vessel. They'd arranged the alien technology across his workbench, creating what she called a pulse beacon, a communication device that could potentially reach her people. "The signal compression will take approximately 3 Earth days to reach Liriani space," Talia explained, her fingers moving with precision over the crystalline components. Her English had become nearly perfect, though her accent retained a melodic quality that Michael found enchanting. He watched her work, conflicted. "Once you activate it, how long before they might respond?" "If a scout vessel is within range, perhaps a week. If not." She looked up, her purple eyes meeting his. "It could be months." Michael nodded, trying to hide his unease. The thought of Talia leaving created a hollow sensation in his chest that he hadn't expected when he first brought her to his cabin. What had begun as scientific curiosity and compassion had transformed into something profound. "You're worried," Talia observed, setting down her tools. Her tendrils shifted in the pattern he now recognized as concern. "What happens when they come for you?" Michael asked. Will you return to your people? Talia crossed the room to him, taking his hands in hers. Her skin had a subtle luminescence even in daylight, brightest at the points where their bodies connected. I don't know, she admitted. I can't stay hidden forever. And there are truths I need to confront among my people. But what we have discovered here. She pressed her forehead against his, a gesture they had developed that blended human and Liriani intimacy. This changes everything, Michael. Later that evening, they lay together in bed, the cabin creaking around them as wind whistled through the pines. Michael traced the patterns along Talia's shoulder, watching them brighten under his touch. Their physical relationship had evolved slowly, both of them discovering the surprising compatibility of their bodies. Though different in many ways, the fundamental architecture of pleasure seemed universal. Will you tell me now? Michael asked, his voice low in the darkness. The history you mentioned before. Why your people really fear humans. Talia was quiet for so long that Michael thought she might have fallen asleep. Finally, she turned to face him, her expression solemn. My people have a legend, she began. Of a schism that occurred millennia ago. A separation of our species during our early expansion to the stars. Her hand drifted to his chest, resting over his heart. There was a faction that believed in rapid evolution through genetic manipulation. They were cast out, sent away on generation ships to the edges of known space. According to our historical records, they were lost. Michael's breath caught as the implication dawned on him. You're saying? Nothing certain, Talia cautioned. But the biological similarities between us are too numerous for coincidence. Our biochemistry, our emotional responses, even our genetic structures share patterns that would be impossible through separate evolutionary paths. You think humans might be descendants of your people? That we're. Michael struggled with the concept. Related? The Council of Elders believes so, yes. They fear reconnection would awaken something dormant in both our species. A recognition. Her eyes held his in the dim light. Like what I felt when I first saw you. Michael recalled that moment in the forest clearing, the inexplicable sense of familiarity that had passed between them before any words were exchanged. Why keep this secret from me until now? Because activating the beacon forces a choice. Talia sat up, the sheet falling away from her body, the patterns across her skin pulsing with emotion. If I'm right, and our peoples were once one, then what happens when they arrive isn't just about my return. It could be first contact between long-separated branches of the same tree. The weight of this revelation settled between them. Michael's mind raced with implications, scientific, philosophical, personal. If humans had indeed descended from spacefaring ancestors, it would rewrite every understanding of human history and evolution. That's why you came to Earth, he realized. Not just political refuge. You suspected the connection. I needed to know. Talia's tendrils moved reflexively, betraying her agitation. The Council forbids investigation, calls it dangerous mythology. But the star charts, the ancient texts, they all pointed here. Michael pulled her close, feeling the subtle vibration in her chest that indicated emotional intensity. Whatever happens, whatever we discover, we face it together. Talia relaxed against him. Tomorrow I activate the beacon. We should prepare for what comes after. Dawn broke across the snow-covered mountains. Michael stood on the porch, coffee steaming in his hands as he watched Talia walking barefoot through the snow. The cold didn't affect her as it would a human, her body regulated temperature differently. She looked ethereal against the white landscape, her skin's blue luminescence visible even in daylight. In the basement, the beacon waited. Once activated, their private world would inevitably expand to include others. Government agencies, scientists, perhaps even Talia's people, all would descend upon them, ending their isolation. He thought of all they stood to lose, but also what humanity stood to gain. A connection to the stars, a revelation about their origins, and perhaps a future that extended beyond the boundaries of Earth. Talia turned, seeming to sense his thoughts, and smiled, that strange, beautiful expression that had become the center of his universe. Whatever came next, Michael knew with absolute certainty that his place was beside her. The choice, ultimately, was already made. The beacon had been active for exactly 9 days when Michael's equipment detected the anomaly. It appeared first as an unusual radiation signature in the upper atmosphere, then as a disturbance in radio frequencies that caused static across all channels. By nightfall, satellite imagery, which Michael accessed through his old university credentials, showed what appeared to be a heat distortion hovering 50 miles above North America. "They're here," Talia whispered, her eyes fixed on Michael's computer screen. Her tendrils moved in a pattern he hadn't seen before, anticipation mixed with apprehension. "Faster than I expected. They must have had scouts closer to your solar system." Michael felt his heart rate accelerate. After weeks of preparation, the reality of alien contact suddenly seemed overwhelming. What now? Will they land, or? "They'll scan first," Talia explained, her voice steady despite the subtle trembling of her hands. "Looking for my biometric signature. Once they confirm my presence, they'll establish secure contact." As if summoned by her words, the salvaged components of Talia's communication array began to pulse with light. Symbols scrolled across the crystalline surface, a language Michael had only begun to decipher through Talia's teachings. She approached the device, placing her palm against its surface. The patterns on her skin synchronized with those on the crystal, creating a circuit of light. "It's Commander Niren," she said after a moment. "My former mentor. He leads the diplomatic contingent." "Can I hear?" Michael asked. Talia adjusted something, and a voice filled the room, melodic and multi-toned, like overlapping instruments creating a single complex sound. The language was incomprehensible to Michael, but he could sense the urgency in its cadence. "He's requesting secure transportation coordinates," Talia translated, her expression troubled. "Michael, I need to tell them about you, about what we've discovered. But once I do, everything changes." Michael moved to her side, placing his hand over hers on the crystal. "Then we change together." With a nod, Talia responded to the message, her voice shifting into the complex tonal patterns of her native language. Michael watched, fascinated as always by this aspect of her he could never fully share. When she finished, the crystal pulsed twice and went dark. "What did you tell them?" he asked. "The truth." Her eyes met his, resolute. "That I've confirmed our ancient hypothesis. That humans and Liriani share ancestry. And that I've found one who proves our compatibility beyond doubt." Michael swallowed hard. "How long until they arrive?" "Dawn." Talia's tendrils curled inward slightly. "We should prepare. Niren is progressive by council standards, but this will still be complicated." They spent the night making preparations, gathering research, organizing the findings they documented over their months together, and discussing strategies for the imminent contact. Neither mentioned the fear that hung between them, that forces beyond their control might separate them. As the eastern sky began to lighten, they stood together on the cabin's porch. Michael had dressed carefully in his most professional attire, a suit he hadn't worn since leaving academia. Talia wore a blend of human clothing and fabrics salvaged from her craft, creating an outfit that symbolically bridged their worlds. "There," Talia said suddenly, pointing to the violet hue spreading across the dawn sky. "That's not sunrise." A shimmering distortion appeared above the clearing where her escape pod had first crashed. The air seemed to fold inward, creating a pocket of space that defied physical laws. Within this distortion, a vessel materialized, sleek and pearlescent, roughly the size of a small bus but shaped like an elongated teardrop. No landing gear extended, the craft simply hovered a few feet above the snow, causing it to melt in a perfect circle beneath. A seam appeared along its side, light spilling from within as a portion of the hull reconfigured itself into a ramp. 3 figures emerged. Even from a distance, their similarity to Talia was evident, the same luminescent skin, the same tendrilled crowns instead of hair. They wore form-fitting attire that seemed to shift colors with their movements. Commander Niren, Talia identified the central figure, taller than the others with patterns that glowed predominantly gold rather than blue. The others are security officials. Standard protocol. Michael took a deep breath. Ready? Talia's hand found his, squeezing gently. They already know about you. Let me do the initial introductions. They walked together across the snow-covered ground. Michael felt surreally calm, as though he were watching the scene from outside himself. Here he was, a human scientist who had once been mocked for his theories, about to participate in humanity's first official extraterrestrial contact. The Liriani delegation watched their approach with expressions Michael couldn't read. Their eyes, in varying shades of purple and gold, fixed particularly on where his hand joined with Talia's. When they were 10 paces apart, Talia released Michael's hand and stepped forward. She made a complex gesture with her tendrils and spoke in her native language. The one she'd identified as Niren responded, his voice deeper but with the same musical quality as Talia's. After a brief exchange, Talia turned to Michael. Commander Niren extends formal greetings from the Liriani Diplomatic Council. I've explained that you've been my protector and ally. Michael stepped forward and attempted to replicate the tendril gesture as best a human could with a hand motion. Commander, I welcome you to Earth. I'm Dr. Michael Shaw. To his surprise, Niren responded in heavily accented but understandable English. Dr. Shaw. Your protection of Talia is noted with gratitude. Her transmission contained claims of significant scientific importance. Claims I can verify, Talia interjected, switching back to English. Commander, I've completed extensive comparative analyses. The genetic markers are unmistakable, the physiological responses consistent with the separation hypothesis. Niren's eyes narrowed slightly. You have evidence? Comprehensive evidence, Michael confirmed. Both scientific and... He hesitated, then continued firmly, experiential. The 2 security officials exchanged glances. One of them spoke rapidly to Niren, who responded with a sharp gesture that silenced them. Show me, Niren commanded. Back in the cabin, Michael and Talia presented their findings, genetic comparisons, physiological responses, historical analyses, and cultural parallels that could not be explained by coincidence. Throughout the presentation, Niren remained silent, his expression inscrutable while the security officials grew increasingly agitated. Finally, Niren raised a hand. Talia's hypothesis appears correct. The Forgotten Ones did not perish. They adapted. He turned to Michael. Your kind are descendants of exiles who were never meant to survive. Yet you did more than survive, you thrived, developed independently, and now stand on the cusp of your own space age. Not exiles, Talia corrected firmly. Explorers. The historical records were altered, Commander. I've found references in ancient texts that suggest the separation was not punishment but expedition, a branch of our people seeking a different path. Niren's tendrils moved in what Michael now recognized as skepticism. This contradicts centuries of accepted history. History written by those who stayed behind, Talia countered. What matters now is what we do with this knowledge. The commander turned to Michael. And what do you believe should happen now, human? Michael met his gaze steadily. I believe we're witnessing the opportunity to heal an ancient division. 2 branches of the same tree growing back toward each other. As the words left his mouth, Michael realized the truth that had been building within him since Talia first touched his face in that forest clearing. Their connection wasn't coincidence or mere compatibility, it was recognition, or remembering encoded in their very cells. The revelation hung in the air between species, a truth too profound to be denied, too transformative to be ignored. Whatever came next would forever alter the course of two civilizations that had never truly been separate. The black SUVs appeared on the mountain road 3 days after the Liriani ship's arrival. Michael spotted them through his binoculars, 5 vehicles moving with purposeful speed toward his property. He'd been expecting this. It was impossible to believe that a foreign spacecraft, even with its advanced cloaking technology, could remain undetected by Earth's governments indefinitely. "Talia," he called, rushing back into the cabin. "They're coming. Government vehicles, about 10 minutes out." She looked up from her conversation with Niren. Over the past days, the commander had moved from skepticism to cautious acceptance of their findings. The other Liriani delegates had established a secure perimeter around their ship, maintaining minimal presence near the cabin. "How many?" Talia asked, her tendrils shifting into the pattern Michael recognized as strategic thinking. "At least 15 agents, based on the vehicles." Michael began gathering their most crucial research. "We need to move everything important to the ship." Niren stood, his gold-patterned skin pulsing with concern. "This development accelerates our timeline. The Council must be informed that Earth authorities have detected our presence." Michael worked quickly, transferring data to portable drives while Talia collected physical samples they'd analyze together. Their movements had the practiced efficiency of partners who anticipated each other's needs without speaking. "Michael," Talia said suddenly, stopping mid-motion. "What happens when they take you into custody?" The question hung between them. They both knew the likely outcome. Michael would be isolated, interrogated, possibly charged with espionage or treason for harboring an extraterrestrial and communicating with foreign entities without government sanction. "I've considered that," he replied, voice steady despite his racing heart. "I've prepared documentation explaining everything, emphasizing the peaceful nature of the contact." Niren approached them, his expression solemn. "Dr. Shaw, there is another option." His English had improved remarkably through his neural interface's adaptive programming. "You could accompany us when we depart." The suggestion struck Michael like a physical force. Leave Earth? The possibility had lingered unspoken in his mind, a scenario too momentous to acknowledge directly. "The Council would value a human perspective as we reconsider our people's shared history," Niren continued. "And Talia's research would benefit from your continued collaboration." Talia's eyes met Michael's, violet depths filled with unspoken emotion. "It must be your choice," she said softly. "I won't ask it of you." The sound of vehicles on the gravel driveway ended further discussion. Michael peered through the window to see men and women in tactical gear deploying around the cabin. Their weapons were drawn but not aimed, a show of force rather than immediate aggression. A woman stepped forward from the central vehicle. She wore a dark suit rather than tactical gear, her posture radiating authority. "Dr. Michael Shaw," her voice carried clearly through the winter air. "This is Agent Director Regina Winters with National Security. We need you to exit the cabin immediately. We know about your guests." Michael exchanged glances with Talia and Niren. "I'll speak with them," he decided. "Try to establish diplomatic dialogue." "Niren, can your people secure the ship if needed?" The commander nodded. "We have protocols for premature contact scenarios." But Michael, his tendrils shifted in warning, "Once their superiors become involved, your freedom will likely be forfeit." "I understand." Michael squeezed Talia's hand once, then moved toward the door. "Let me try." Outside, the morning sun glinted off weapon barrels and vehicle windshields. Michael raised his hands as he stepped onto the porch, making his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Director Winters," he called. "I'm Dr. Shaw." Before anything escalates, you should know you're in the presence of an official diplomatic delegation from the Liriani Confederation. The agent's expression remained impassive. Dr. Shaw, we need you to come with us immediately. Your presence has been requested in Washington for debriefing. I'd be happy to share everything I've learned, Michael replied, carefully descending the porch steps. But this is a first contact situation that requires delicate handling. The Liriani are peaceful but have defensive capabilities beyond our technology. We're aware of the vessel, Dr. Shaw. Winters gestured, and two agents moved forward. This location is now under federal jurisdiction. Please come with us voluntarily. Michael recognized the implicit threat. Behind him, he sensed movement. Talia and Niren had emerged onto the porch. The agents' postures immediately stiffened, weapons shifting slightly upward. Hold your fire! Michael shouted, stepping between the agents and the cabin. They're unarmed diplomats. Winters raised a hand, halting her team's advance. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of the Liriani, but her professional composure quickly returned. We have orders to secure all extraterrestrial entities and technology. Director, Talia spoke, her voice carrying clearly across the space between them. I am Talia, scientific attaché to the Liriani Diplomatic Council. We come in peace, seeking to reconnect with our long-separated kindred species. The assertion created visible confusion among the agents. Winters frowned, clearly operating from a different set of assumptions about the alien presence. Kindred species, she questioned. Director, we've discovered compelling evidence that humans and Liriani share common ancestry, Michael explained. This isn't an invasion or infiltration, it's a reunion. One that could advance human science and medicine by centuries. A subtle vibration began beneath their feet. In the clearing beyond the cabin, the Liriani vessel's engines had activated, its pearlescent surface beginning to shimmer with energy. The agents reacted immediately, weapons coming up as they shouted commands. Stop! Michael moved forward, hands still raised. Director Winters, you have seconds to choose between first contact and first conflict. Please, let me show you what we've discovered. Something in his desperate sincerity seemed to reach her. Winters hesitated, then gave a sharp gesture to her team. Stand down. Dr. Shaw, you have 2 minutes to convince me this situation isn't a national security threat. In those 2 critical minutes, Michael presented the core of their findings, genetic markers, historical parallels, and the peaceful intentions of the Liriani delegation. Throughout his explanation, Talia and Niren remained on the porch, their very presence providing visual evidence of the compatibility between species. As his improvised briefing concluded, Michael could see Winters wrestling with protocol versus unprecedented circumstances. Her next words would determine the course of human-Liriani relations for generations. Dr. Shaw, she finally said, I'm authorized to establish preliminary diplomatic protocols in extraordinary situations. I need to contact my superiors, but until then, no one is being detained. She turned toward her team. Establish a perimeter but maintain non-aggressive posture. This is officially a diplomatic scenario. Relief washed through Michael. It wasn't resolution, but it was breathing room. As the agents repositioned, Talia approached him, her tendrils moving in a pattern of urgency. Michael, Niren has received communication from the Council. More ships are being dispatched, a full diplomatic fleet. Once they arrive, everything changes. How long? Michael asked. 36 hours at most. Her eyes searched his. The window for personal choices narrows, Michael. Soon this will be between governments and councils, not individuals. He understood her meaning immediately. If he wanted to leave with them, the opportunity would soon vanish beneath layers of bureaucracy and international negotiations. That night, as government officials began arriving and a makeshift diplomatic zone was established around his cabin, Michael stood alone at the edge of the forest. Above him, stars punctured the velvet darkness, each one a potential home to beings who might share humanity's ancestral code. Talia found him there, her luminescent skin glowing softly in the darkness. Without words, she took his hand, her patterns brightening at the contact. "I've made my decision," Michael said quietly. Before he could continue, a brilliant light cut through the night sky, not from the stars, but from above the atmosphere. The Liriani fleet had arrived earlier than expected, multiple vessels becoming visible as they entered Earth's atmosphere. "It's begun," Talia whispered, watching the ships descend. "Whatever happens now will reshape both our worlds." Michael turned to her, framing her face with his hands. "Then let's reshape them together. I'm coming with you, Talia. Not just as a scientist or diplomat, but as proof that our peoples belong together." The luminescent patterns across her skin pulsed with joy as she pulled him into an embrace. Above them, the night sky filled with lights from another world, while below, humanity prepared for a revelation that would forever alter their understanding of their place in the cosmos. As dawn broke, Michael Shaw stepped aboard the Liriani vessel, not as Earth's captive or refugee, but as its first willing ambassador to the stars. With Talia beside him, he carried humanity's hopes into a future where the ancient division between their peoples would finally begin to heal. Behind them, Earth grew smaller, not abandoned, but expanded into a wider family of stars that had been waiting to welcome them home.